Hi, it's Dr. Steve from Misericordia University, and welcome to the videos to support week 3 of the graduate course Principles of Interface Design. In this first of 3 videos for this week's class, let's focus on screen design principles and issues. In particular, for this video, let's focus on creating a path for the user's eye to follow through a screen. In this first video, let's start by getting an introduction and look at some groundwork for screen layout, and then let's consider creating a path for the user's eye to follow. In the second video, we'll consider some very specific issues: proximity, alignment, and repetition, and fonts and typography. And in our third video, we'll look at designing PowerPoint presentations. So let's get started. Before considering individual elements involved in screen layout, let's start with an overview or an introduction to screen layout. When you're preparing to design screens, it's similar to placing furniture in a room in the interior design or decorating field. A person looking to design a room doesn't just arbitrarily place furniture anywhere at all. There are a lot of factors to consider. You have to consider how the room will be used by that particular group of users, that particular family. And you have to look at their taste and also the purposes for the room. As part of the design, the designer considers colors, patterns, textures that will create atmosphere and mood. The designer plans for a traffic flow. How are people going to move through the room comfortably? And not only does the designer consider where to place elements, but also the person has to consider where not to place elements. While looking at the small level, at the granular level, the designer also has to not forsake the large view, the overview of everything. So when you're designing, you consider not just individual elements within a room, but also how the elements work together, both in terms of function and also in terms of aesthetics. Is it pleasing to the people who are going to live there? Also, the designer does not design each room individually, like in isolation, but rather you have to look at how all of the rooms are going to work together. In the planning of rooms, an interior designer tends to work on paper before actually doing any of the designs or attempting any of them to see how they actually feel in the room. Decorators tend to work with blueprints, and they generate sketches, and they even may do renderings to see what it will look like in 3 dimensions. In a very similar fashion, many screen designers do something called storyboarding. Storyboarding refers to paper drawings of screen designs before implementation. Now, of course, in today's day and age, you can also not do it on paper, but you can have a facsimile of that, or the equivalent of that, facilitated through technology. Just like decorators use paper drawings, storyboarding allows planners of instructional design, interface designers, to plan, to think, and to manipulate elements, and separate that before you get bogged down in all the particulars of actually designing the screen through technology. Online, you can find a plethora of different storyboarding templates. Realize that different companies and also different individual designers work with different templates to storyboard. You can select one of those, or you can simply make your own. All you need to do is draw an area for the screen and then allow room for you to make some notes about what's going on there. Remember that the purpose of interface design is to ensure that all users can use your interface with ease. And that's in terms of reading, understanding it, having a low learning curve as they're first getting into the application to understand navigation. Hopefully it will be intuitive, easy to use, efficient, and basically conducive and appealing for learners to use. Simple rule is, if it's not easy, people tend to not use it. For our first issue, dealing with designing individual screens for an application, let's consider how to create a path for the eye to follow on the screen. So when we talk about path for the eye, when you're reading in America, what path does our eye expect to follow? What's natural for us? In this country, from left to right, from top to bottom. So when we look at a screen, whether it's on a PC or some mobile device, how do we expect to look at that screen in this country? Well, we typically go from bottom left to top right, and then left to right, and then we exit down on the bottom right. If you plan your individual screen designs well, you can decide where the eye is going to move, and we can guide the user. In general, the human eye tends to move from large objects, we focus there first, and we move to smaller objects. If we see something unusual, we tend to go there first and then move to the more common. If something is isolated versus in a group, we tend to look at the individual elements first and then look at the group. As we've said in the past, if there is something brighter and there is a less bright or a darker element, we tend to go to the bright element first and then to the less bright. If there are graphics on a screen and text, we tend to focus on the graphics first and then move over to the text. So if you use these techniques well, you can initially focus a user in one particular part of your screen, and then you can direct the user to move throughout that screen, even in a way that's not natural for the eye to move. And also, we've seen many examples in today's world online where there is no path, and it looks like chaos on the screen, and then the user is confused and befuddled and doesn't really know where to look first. So let's consider this issue better. The difference between a printed book or any printed material and anything electronic is that a book, the text is laid out from top to bottom and nothing's going to change or move. Now, electronically, as we know, elements on the screen can move. They can change their location once the screen is embarked on. Also, different elements on the screen may be introduced sequentially or at different times. And it doesn't all have to be at one time, and it does not have to be static. In this course, we're going to look at some techniques to apply these different ways of introducing text and see what the benefits are and how it can help the learner in the process of using our applications. As opposed to printing a book or printed material, designers of electronic screens create paths for two reasons. We want to make a definite place for the eye to travel in order to ensure that the users are going to read the information in the intended sequence, because we are instructing or training. And the second reason that is also equally important, and that is instead of using just static designs, as in a book, it's just static and it's not going to change. In the electronic world, we can hold attention by making it dynamic, by making it movable, by adding some visual interest on the screen. There are several common paths created for the eyes to travel on a screen. One of the most common is the C path. And when we're saying about a path that looks like a C, we're talking about actually having the user start in the upper right-hand side of the screen and travel around as if we drew a C, letter C, right on that screen. Now, it doesn't have to be the entire screen. Depending where the elements are on the screen, it could be a partial screen, but we're still like drawing a letter C on there. So what is the deal with the C path? Well, it's a relaxed, leisurely path of looking at a screen. It's comfortable for the user, and it's often used. And we'll look at some examples in a moment. An O path is well balanced, and it's comfortable. An S path is another a leisurely path like the C path, just leisurely comfortable for the user. A Z path, if you were to imagine a letter Z drawn on the screen, um, you know that as opposed to an S or a C where it's a curve and it's smooth, a Z path kind of moves more quickly. It implies more movement, a little faster. Those jagged edges create just a little bit more interest. Another path that's very common today, especially on the web, is the F path. So let's take a look at these and see how it's done. First of all, how we can recognize it, how you can create it, and why it's done. In the process, we want to balance the consistent, the comfortable, the relaxed with surprises. Think about in horror movies how surprises come about. A monster will appear sometimes in a horror movie. Oh, and there comes the monster. And the monster not only comes from one of the corners, the monster never comes from the middle of the screen. It comes from a side, from off in the periphery, to make it interesting, to make a surprise for the eye. So keep in mind that as a good designer, we want to balance the comfortable, but we want to balance it with surprises to keep it interesting. It is important to create a path for the eye. Look at this miniature snapshot of a screen. Where does your eye go here? Like, where should you start? It's hard to figure where to begin this process. So the eye doesn't know where to go. A lot of things we see online today, unfortunately, are designed in that way, or should I say they're not designed. Let's compare this other snippet. So in this miniature, we see that I kind of see where I should go. And what I'm seeing here is I should start with the word oh boy and then move across. So if you look at that, that's really the letter C. So notice when we say a C, we're talking about the curve that's going around. It doesn't mean that we literally draw a huge C on the screen and we have to start from that far point, but we get the essence of that C movement. Notice the big difference between the first example and the second. In the second example, you're comfortable because you know where to go. There's not a moment of confusion. In the first example, there's a lot of confusion there. You really don't know where to start. If you want to see other good examples of this, look in the comics page in any newspaper. And you can immediately see, although there's a lot of information, you can see in each frame, you can see where to start. The comic writers are very skilled at designing that path so you know where to start and where to go. Because imagine the comics, if you got, we have maybe 3 frames or so to look at, if you got confused about where to start, not only would it confuse you and you'd lose in many cases the joke of it, but also you get frustrated and you'd probably turn the page and not do that again. So C path, very common. Path in general, very, very important. Here we have an F path for web content. According to many studies, readers on the web tend to read across the top of the page, and then they watch for eye-catching elements. So they're looking for something that's bold-faced, something that's a graphical element, or anything that's going to catch their eye. And as they read across the page, they tend to read less and less of the material. And keep in mind, at a previous class we mentioned that in the old days we used to call it above the fold. Here we still have the fold. The fold online means, are the users going to scroll down past that first screen full of web content? And again, if it interests them, then they will. But on that first page, notice here we have the reading across the whole thing, and then reading maybe a little bit less. Oh, there's an interesting graphic there, we'll read over there. and then look a little bit less, and then read a little bit less, and a little bit less, and then if they're interested, then they'll scroll down and go a little bit farther down. So to design an F path involves us looking at the path, looking at where the eye typically will travel, and aiding the eye to travel and supporting the eye to travel in those directions, in those places. And number two, it involves us planning out our content. How do you want the content to appear on that screen, knowing that the most important material should probably be in the top and or in the first line or two of material on that page. Here we're looking at a Z path. So in a Z path, notice that we're starting in the upper left, because typically that's where the American eye starts. We're going across the page, and then we're going down, because we see the graphic, and then we're going down because all these other elements are on the next line down, so to speak. Now, with a Z path, it is predictable, but because of that jagged sense of where we're going to create that letter Z on there, it tends to give us a little more movement. The eye is moving a little quicker and looking through things. Given that, important things up in the upper left, where the number 2 is placed here on that corner. We travel down looking at the graphic, and we move down to here to the number 3. That's an important place to have content that's significant. And where it finishes here in number 4 is also another place to have significant content that you really want the user to notice. So a Z path is also, compared with an F path, very commonly used in screen design, both on the web and in other places and other media as well. Having looked at several paths for the eye to travel, realize that it's not only in the placement of the elements, but it's also has to do with the way that you design and choose the graphic elements that you're going to use, because you can give visual cues to the eye, to the user, to determine how to, like where to look and where to focus and where to start. This is an example, a screenshot of something from an advertising firm, and they were studying where does the user's eye look first and most. So here we can see hotspots. So you'll see red as being the hottest place, yellow also frequency, and green less frequency. So notice where the user starts here. So here we're looking at the user looks at a graphic, so okay, let's look there first because there's a graphic. And also there's a face, and people tend to draw there first. It's also a round object and so on, so it's easy to kind of draw you right in there. So we look there, and then the user will say, okay, well, I've read that, so let me start looking over here. Now notice here that users are going in this area and they're going here. Not quite sure where all to go, but they're going in those areas. Now let's compare with this advertisement. A big difference here. Here we see the face, so the user is certainly going to start there and look there a lot. Now where's that face looking? Well, the face is looking up here, aimed in this direction. So the users would then go over here and say, okay, well, let's start here. And then they'll read like an F pattern. So notice the F naturally happening here. More, less, and a little bit less. But there's a graphic down here, so the users will certainly go there. And also the users will end up over here because there's some other isolated element in that lower right-hand corner. And users tend to go to the lower right-hand corner and then go off the screen. Later in this class session, we're going to take a look at applying these principles that are addressing these various issues of screen design, and we're going to apply them in the area of PowerPoint presentations. So let's try this. Here I have a graphic and I've got some text. So first of all, I'm going to draw this text out just a little bit wider. Maybe I'm going to balance it. I'll make it just a little bit larger so that these two elements left and right are balanced. I'm going to move this B over a little bit more. Now at this point, the B is looking in the wrong direction. So if people were to draw a heat map on here, the user, typical user would look over here at the face first and then see this graphic and then say, oh, okay, well, I guess I'll read this over here. Let's say that we wanted to arrange this better. I'm going to click on this. I'm going to do a picture format. I'm going to rotate this, and I'm going to rotate it over, so I'll flip horizontal. And even to make it better, I'm going to take the free rotate handle, and I'm going to have the B looking up in this direction. Maybe I'll just move him or her up here a little bit higher. Now, look at how this is designed. The first thing the person's going to look at is this B and see the face and see this whole body is kind of pointing up here. It's like a whole thing pointing up in this direction. So on a micro level, if I were to look at this face and I look at these wings and I look at this tail and its body is pushing back up here, so this whole thing is like whoop, turn you right around like a big C and pushing you over in this direction to read this material, and then you'd go out on this end over here. So if there was some other element that was significant after this, I would put it down here in the lower right. Like if I wanted to insert, let's say, a text box to say some other material, like read more. And then I would just balance the element here by making it a little bit larger. And maybe I'd even put it in a different color. Maybe I try to match the B a little bit with the color, although I might make it just a little bit brighter than that. So let's take a look at several examples of path for the eye on different websites. Let's start off with Google. Here you can see that these small elements up on top, they are very small and they're not meant to attract your eye there at all. Instead, you see Google, and then we're drawn around here. So notice this is a classic C pattern. If I go to Dogpile, another search engine, I see the same pattern being followed. So here, there's not even anything on the top here at all. But we do start here, and we're drawn around in a circular formation. So here we have a classic C pattern. And they put a little something of interest on the bottom here. Wikipedia's main page, here's a true O path. We start up here. The most important element for people in this country will be this very first item, and then you can travel in this circular path. It's very stable, very balanced. Notice there's a lot of white space all around here. Classic O path. Here I'm at PBS. So when I look at this one, notice that the most important things are on the very top, drawing the eye across. And now it's just opening as I draw across here. But that very first line is the first line going across of the F. We come down. There's a graphic to draw you over here. And then we see little bits down here, and they're including some graphics over on the right to try to draw your eye all the way across. So you can see the lines of the F pattern here. And let's finish by looking at the newly released Misericordia University site. Notice the most important things across the top, the menu right over here, and then we see the name of the institution large. So it kind of draws you into the middle and draws us across. Now it'd be interesting if the name of the institution or a company and the logo were located in the upper left, because that would be the first place that you look, and then draw you across the menu and so on, and draw across. Now there are no elements down here, but yet we're drawn into that graphic. This video running is very interesting. It's all movement. It draws you in, and if you don't know the campus, you're probably very interested to learn about it. If you do know the campus, you're very interested to see what they're going to show about it. So that draws you right in. And then after that, so we go to the right, we kind of come down here, see the graphic, and then we move over here to the right where we have how to inquire, and then the last element that's over here, which happens in this case to be accessibility. So it is a Z path through this page. So notice how commonly the paths for the eye are used by designers online. In summary, in this first video for week 3, we took a look at an introduction and laid some groundwork for screen layout designs, and then we considered the important feature of designing a path for the user's eye to follow through screens. In our second section, let's focus on very specific items of proximity, alignment, repetition, fonts, and typography. And then don't miss the third video where we put it together and look at designing PowerPoint presentations.